welcome to Season 9, Episode 4 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading Orestes Brownson's The American Republic, Its Constitution, Tendencies, and Destiny, written in 1865, about what he sees now as the origin of government. What we're talking about, continuing to talk about, he spends a couple chapters on this. This chapter is mostly about social compact theory,
Yes.
which I thought was very interesting. I think it's also important to note before we start talking, this is the last in-person episode we'll do for quite some time.
Yes.
I'm moving to Florida in a few days.
Yes.
I guess you have no thoughts on that.
Well, it's kind of sad, but it's also exciting.
Yes, that is true.
And so we'll be taking a 14-hour drive with various detritus that you have accumulated over your undergraduate career.
Lots of books, lots of records.
Yes, a lot of unessentials, as I like to call them.
Yeah, they seem essential to me.
Yes, I understand. No, it'd be good to, and then your mother and I are gonna take a couple extra days, and I've convinced her to go to a beach.
There you go.
She's not a big fan anymore of going to the beach. She used to always want to go to the beach, but now she's like, I've been to a beach. Okay, well,
There you go.
all right. You've danced once, so why do you keep dancing?
You make a good point.
She doesn't.
I don't think she would
follow the
agree. I don't
reasoning
think
on
she
that
would
one.
agree with that one.
Yes. So yeah. So it's we could still keep it going.
Yeah.
It'll be by
Zoom again, as we have done in the past. But
Yes. Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is a good chapter. I read this a couple days ago, so it's not too fresh in my mind.
I just finished it moments ago.
Yes, so we're the exact
And
opposite
I
here.
will say this, that it shows my dedication to this podcast that I am not listening to the remainder of the Elon Musk-Trump interview, which I was locked out of for quite some
Very
time
sorry
because
to take you away from that.
Elon Musk claims that there's some sort of DDoS
Yes.
attack on Twitter to keep people from hearing Trump, which I tend to believe. But there were over 1 million people listening.
Wow, that's a lot of
when I
people.
came in here. Yeah.
Wow.
And they hadn't really said anything interesting yet. They're talking about the assassination, which is interesting, of course.
Yes.
But no breaking news yet from that interview.
Interesting.
But, so I am not listening to that so that someone else can listen to me.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
But I was trying to read while I was hearing Trump ramble on about the...
So probably not the most focused on the book, maybe. Or maybe not the most focused on Trump.
I can.
Or you're
I
very,
can have,
very good at multitasking.
I can have absolute focus on two separate things. At
Wow,
the same time.
that's impressive. That's really incredible.
Yes. Yeah. Can you hold two thoughts in your head at the same time?
What do you mean?
Evidently, you can't.
It's ridiculous.
I can't.
Well,
I can
okay.
only think of one thing at a time.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I don't know how I can think two things at once. I mean, there's something that's sort of in the background that I'm thinking about, maybe.
I have feelings in the background, like anxiety, or like I'll have, there's something else I'm supposed to be doing, or something else I have to do. But if I'm thinking of one thing, I can't think of another thing.
I see.
We just clarified that I was acting as if I was on the beach.
Yes,
there was
I
a
apologize
surf
for any-
sound in the background. I had a lot of static.
It
on
should
my
come out in
microphone,
editing, but...
Editing?
Yeah, I do some editing.
What do you mean? You edit what I say?
Well, I clean up the sound quality.
Oh, do you-
I don't cut anything out,
Do you bleep
usually.
over when I inadvertently cuss?
No.
Okay, you're supposed to, I think.
Oh, well.
Yeah, because we have a rating,
Yeah, that's true.
we-
Technically,
we-
we do have a rating.
a self-rating.
Well, I think you need at least like 100 people to listen for anybody to care. I don't think
Don't give out our numbers
we've crossed
publicly.
that.
We have at times, I think.
Yeah. We have, over the course of the almost 4 years we've been doing this, we have a few thousand.
Oh, for sure.
downloads,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
8,000 or something like that.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, each episode
Accumulated.
doesn't get too many downloads. But we should probably talk about the book at some point.
I believe that, I don't know how many other people change their minds about important philosophical beliefs. And this guy's changing my mind.
Really?
I was really pretty strongly in the social compact theory of the American government, and I think he's convinced me I was wrong.
I've been drifting away recently, but
I
this
kinda sense
book is
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Really? You've sensed that about me?
Yes.
How so?
Well, especially when you went to we were coming back, or were you going? No, coming back from your seminar.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think, or the ISI thing.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. But I mean, even in a little bit leading up to that too,
Right,
I haven't been really as interested in the social compact theory as I was.
Yeah, and he's making a really good argument about its. Well, I mean, basically, his argument in some respects is like, well, it's all a bunch of fluff. You know, it's a bunch of theory, but I mean, I guess we should just go right into it. I mean, basically, I think this whole chapter is really just a refutation of the social contract theory.
Yeah, this chapter.
That's the way I read it.
Because we're coming from that last chapter where he's talking very practically, how does a state come to exist? And he puts it in the context of the family and the authority of the father over the children. So, of course, naturally, if he's coming from that framework, he would not have any faith in the idea that, just groups of people came together one day and sort of decided that we're gonna all agree to do this together, that compact idea.
Yeah, and so he first starts off in this chapter, which is a continuation of the origin of government theory that he has, mentioning that these people would never agree. The people that believe in a social compact theory of the state or the government or republic, they would never agree that there's some sort of divine origin of the government or of the government. Yeah, because they would. I think they were being accused of being in favor of theocracy.
Yeah, because he says he's talking about that, and he's saying, of course they're not going to want to have any sort of divine idea, and they don't like the patriarchal theory, so of course they have to come up with something else. They have to come up with something that's based more on these abstract concepts that they're more likely to believe.
Well, I don't know that he's saying that they have to come up with something else, but they would never come up with some sort of divine revelation or like a divine spark or some sort of higher power leading us into a more just society. And he hasn't said it yet, but I fully expect he's going to get there. Yeah, where he's going to say, the Judeo-Christian philosophy underpinning our government in the United States and the West is at least divinely inspired, I guess.
Because I think he's right. Because you're just the intellectual climate at the time. The social compact theory came out of the Enlightenment, which was I think above all else trying to find human reasons for everything rather than divine. Purely sort of rational, reason based rather than anything supernatural in that sort of sense.
Yeah, I like when he says in the beginning of 26, he says he's describing these people, the social compact people. Believe in that. They were engaged not with the question, whence does government derive its authority, but with its nature and the reciprocal rights and duties of the governors and the governed. And I think he's right about that. Yeah. And he's saying, it's not like it was imposed. This theory was imposed by God. It's just we're all independent actors, but they never really did address. Okay, where do we derive the authority to rule ourselves in a sense? And I think and this kind of plays into something I mentioned before that I've been really thinking about this year in 2024 is the desecration of man theory. And I think these philosophers from that age really were trying to demystify in a way humanity. Like that we don't have we're not children of God, and we're not. We don't have these souls that have this higher meaning or higher value than other animals, that kind of stuff. Anyway, so that's kind of an aside. Yeah. And that's not what he's saying.
I think he's also making a point there that I think a lot of the times the social compact theorists are more interested in giving a reason for why a government can be overthrown rather than where authority comes from in the first place. Because that's the natural conclusion of all their theories. If the reciprocal nature isn't there anymore, then the people can rise up and institute a new government. And I think that's really more so their goal, rather than just explaining where authority comes from more often.
And and he's convinced me that I should hate Hobbes and Locke as much as I hate Rousseau.
Yeah, well, Hobbes is pretty bad. Locke is generally a little bit better, but Hobbes and Rousseau are definitely much worse.
Hobbes, I didn't have the. I guess I just saw the direct effect of Rousseau with the French Revolution, and I hate them all. Yeah, and Rousseau so logically carried just pointed the path of a dystopian nightmare. Yeah. And Hobbes, I thought, was just a little more theoretical, and
his idea,
the same line of thinking, this starts with the social contract theory, and then you're talking about and then they talk about the state of nature, and Rousseau especially was that we're all born pure, and it's the state, the government or the state that makes us impure, and so that we have to cleanse it or whatever, whatever the remedy ultimately is. If you really believe that. It opens up all sorts of tragic possibilities.
Yeah, Hobbes takes the approach that, in the state of nature, it's war. That is the state of nature.
Correct.
Because, we can't really reason with each other. It's all just, everyone for themselves. Locke, at least a little bit, has some idea of like God-given principles, because he says, the state of nature is in peace. And so, with our God-given abilities, we can kind of reason with one another. Hobbes and Rousseau, I think, just completely remove the God element and say, in different contexts, state of war, but then, the Rousseau is then, we're all kind of in peace, but then the state, introduces impurities and things like that.
Yeah, and none of it was completely true, but I think there's some elements of truth. When you look at, it just kind of makes sense. But when you really get into the nitty gritty, it's like, this isn't right. Because, when I always think when they talk about like, well, if there's no government, I think of somebody like either in Europe way back when, or, out west in the American frontier, where you just had a homesteader out there. Yeah. On their own, and let's say it's not in Indian territory necessarily, where you have to worry about armed marauders or fighting people. And you're just out there, and then somebody comes along and wants to farm the acreage kind of near you. I mean, what happens under those circumstances? That person will probably come and say, "Hey, is there a good place to farm here?" And I just kind of envision. Well, is it these people come towards you so you kill them? It's a natural state of war, or is it something kind of more commonsensical or more natural, where you're like, well, what are your intentions? And if their intentions are, hey, I want to homestead like you do. Is there some place nearby, not your whatever you're doing? I don't want to destroy you or hurt you. And then I think generally you'd have a cooperative, like, hey, more the merrier. Listen, I'll help you build a hut or something.
And he kind of brings up that idea, because he says, in as far as this thought experiment is even possible, it's kind of the idea of people were marooned on an island.
Yes.
But he says even that is an imperfect analogy, because those people already have some idea of society and of government and those principles, and so it's like you can never go back to that time. I think it's the same case with your homesteader. It's people who aren't just born in nothing, but have come from somewhere, or have parents,
because my example, either in a few centuries ago in Europe, or I don't know, it's a couple centuries ago in the United States, they would have been Christians. Yeah, really. Yeah. I mean, they would have been raised Christians. They would have gone to church, and they would have read the Bible at least, or had it read to them.
So they're not just abstract, it's thoughtless beings out there.
And they've left a society on the East Coast, and they've traveled into, a new land, so to speak, new to them and all that. So I think he makes that point a little bit later in the chapter. Yeah, if you put somebody that's from our current society into, the Lord of the Flies situation, where you're marooned on an island, you're still that civilized person dropped in that situation. The Lord of the Flies was children, so it's a little bit more interesting, I think.
Yeah. He then goes on. He talks about, Locke, Hobbes.
What? Piggy.
Oh, yes, I see. Yeah. He talks about Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau, and then he brings a good point on 27. He says, this theory is the prevailing theory in America. He says, the state as defined by the elder Adams is held to be a voluntary association of individuals. Individuals create civil society and may uncreate it whenever they judge it advisable. And I think that's still very much true today. I mean, in a high school civics class, you hear a lot about social compact theory, you hear a lot about Locke, about Thomas Paine, those sorts of figures. You don't really hear any alternatives for theories of how authority exists and why the government is created and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's the logical conclusion of that theory is that you can break that contract, or the contract can be you can separate yourself. It's not really I guess the theory is, and of course the North in the Civil War asserted that it was a breach of the contract by you saying you want to get out. It's like a forever contract, but that's not the way it was really understood at the time. Yeah. Especially by Jefferson, who said, we should have a revolution every 19 years or whatever it was. But, which I don't endorse, but I think under that theory is a logical conclusion for it.
Well, because
they don't teach that, but because they teach the modern version of America, which is post-Civil War. Because pre-Civil War, there was a lot of support for any of the several states could separate. In all of the states, they all kind of had this theory that a lot of people, not everybody. Well, if this doesn't work for us, if the other however many states are at the time, other 12 so to speak, are going to be against us, then we'll just get out. And I think everybody expected that would happen if there wasn't at least a minimal amount of cooperation. But now, of course, after the Civil War and the 600,000 killed and all that, once you're in the club, you can't get out of the club.
And that's why, I think Brownson puts, loyalty as his highest virtue, which we talk about later.
Right.
But I mean, back to the Jefferson point, it's incredibly logical.
Yes.
Because if it is derived from the consent of the governed, the next generation did not consent to what their parents did. And so, of course, you're going to have a revolution. You're going to have that new reckoning with who gives the authority. Every single new generation that comes about is going to have to do that. And that's, of course, a completely untenable way to have a society and have a country.
Well, and you're going to see, I think at the very end of the chapter, he mentions the debt assumed by the previous generation or incurred by the previous generation. We are going to see in the next 10, at least, or no more than 20 years, the generation past mine saying, you know what, we didn't sign off on this debt. Why are we paying this? Because it is becoming unpayable.
Yeah.
We're paying more now on debt service than we do for the entire bill for national defense. It's over $1 trillion a year. Wow. And if we're up to over $35 trillion. So that means that if we started miraculously, not just balance the budget, but had $1 trillion surplus every year to pay off the debt, it would take us 35 years plus interest to pay off that debt. So you're really talking, 60 years?
Yeah.
If you pay it off at $1 trillion a year plus what you're paying in interest. Well, I guess let's say you're paying $1 trillion in interest, which is, of course, people don't realize. I'm going to go on a rant here.
Sure.
That debt payment is going to accelerate because a lot of the debt is locked in at the near zero interest rates, and those are slowly unwinding and reauthorize debt or new bonds under the current interest rate that may be as high as 5%. Wow. So in very short order, within the next 5 years, that debt service, even if it was the same amount, is going to be double what we're paying now, because the interest rates will be double what we're paying now on the existing debt, and we're not paying any of it off. And it will destroy this country, quite frankly, because nobody's talking about it, or very few people are. I mean, and it also becomes an inflation creator. It devalues the currency, and so you have the hyperinflation, which is a country buster. And so you're going to have hyperinflation. You're not going to have any money to mollify the masses by spending money, because nobody's going to let you borrow anymore. You can only borrow so much of your own money, which is what we're doing. And the people that are 20 years old now, your generation, are going to wake up someday and say, why the hell are we paying all the bills for those damn boomers?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we didn't sign off on that. We didn't benefit from it. We're struggling. We can't even get a job. If we have a job, we can't even pay for groceries. Yeah. I can't afford to have kids or buy a house. F that. We're not doing. We're defaulting.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, pandemonium. I don't know what happened. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Yeah.
Nobody knows, because we are the cornerstone of the world economy.
Yeah.
What happens if the 20 to 30 year olds at some point just say, you know what, fuck it, we're not going to do it. Yeah. And they elect representatives say, we're just going to stop paying.
I don't know. I have no idea what happens. Nobody has ever thought it would happen.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yeah. But I mean, the systems did not exist under the thought that could ever happen, is what I'm saying.
What systems?
Like the system of the debt borrowing constantly.
Well, yes and no, because, I do municipal debt work, and it's always understood that a municipality can very unlikely default on its debt. It's a sovereign. Political subdivision of the sovereign state of Missouri. And so there are consequences for that. But most of it is you just will never be able to borrow money again. Yeah. I mean, that's really, you just have junk bond status for any of your future issues. You don't want to do that, because then you have to pay a premium interest the next time you borrow anything. But if you say, screw it, we're just never going to borrow anything anymore, default. Yeah. You know, that $10 million bond issue for roads and bridges, we got the $10 million. We're just not going to pay it back. Screw you. And they could sue, but we're a sovereign. And so what's the nature of the lawsuit? against us. I don't know. Good luck. Piss off, buddy. You shouldn't have let us borrow $10 million from you.
Yeah.
But then nobody's ever going to, lend money to you again. So you're going to be really, when you need to build a new firehouse, for all of them to play video games and cook chili dinners. You're not going to be able to get that.
You're touching on a different rant. I think we need to shut it down.
But the social contract theory of it, what you're talking about is like one generation. How does one generation incur all that debt for the second generation?
Yeah.
And it really is unjust, especially in the boomers and Gen X, where people my age are starting to get to the point of retirement, and they're collecting those checks, which that money's already been spent by the boomers. You know what? Why are we even allowing them to take any money out of Social Security? Well, because they paid into it. Yeah, but they voted for the people that spent it all.
Yeah.
And but I don't know what to do about all that because you might have a lot of old people starving on the streets too. You don't want that either. Yeah.
But going back to his argument here, he makes a really good point.
Which page?
Still on 27.
Yes.
He says, the law of nature is as much in force in civil society as out of it. Civil law does not abrogate or supersede natural law, but presupposes it and supports itself on it as its own ground and reason. Because he says, man in civil society is not out of nature, but is in it, is in his most natural state. Men are social animals.
Yes.
Of course, in the state of nature, we're going to naturally form these ideas, based on the what he says, the natural justice and equity dictated by the reason common to all men.
Yes.
That persists in the civil law because it's in the natural law. That is just in our nature as people. We're going to come up with government, or government's going to exist in the state of nature because that is who we are as people.
Yes.
That is our nature to have government. We just don't exist as monkeys, out in the woods.
Well, monkeys are kind of civil. I mean, they have their own organizational structure. But I agree 100%. And this is where he started convincing me.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second. State of nature is really, like I talked about, like two guys, or two families meeting up as homesteaders. They are absolutely, unless one of them is a sociopathic murderer, which is possible. But generally, they're social people in a state of nature with no government, no oversight. They're going to form a loose affiliation as more people come out and the generations grow. The natural state of things is they're going to create a government.
Yeah, because I think they're
going to have a town hall meeting of some sort. They're all going to get together. They'll call it a festival, and they'll say, "Hey, we got to dam up that creek so it quits flooding our crops. How about we get together next week and do it?" Okay, well, who's going to get the rock? Well, I'll get the rock. Yeah. Who's going to get this? I'll do that.
Yeah.
You just formed a fucking local government. Yeah. I mean, literally, and that's exactly how it happens. And he's convincing me that is the state of nature of humanity.
I think the state of nature, as the idea of us all being just complete blank slates, I think is a very unreligious concept.
Correct.
It supposes that we have no sort of purpose, that we have no creator, no intelligent design, that we're all just kind of wandering around aimlessly, fighting with each other or living in some sort of weird peace. But I mean, if you believe that human beings have a purpose or have a point or a nature to their existence, it has to be a nature as social beings, because that is what we are. That is what makes us fundamentally human is our social nature.
Now, I think a different, or maybe a different corollary to this, but he kind of implies it here, where he's talking about the uncivilized tribal areas of humanity. It's almost like I feel like he's going to get to the point where he's saying that certain societies or certain communities have that divine inspiration and others don't. Because that scenario that I describe is not going to be that common in certain areas of the world, where if you're out there and you're homesteading and some guy comes along, that guy might just kill you, so there's a certain level of assumptions of a lack of depravity that may not exist in some societies. And I think he's going to get around to suggesting that. But he hasn't stated it, but he talks about it.
He mentions that on page 28.
Yes.
He's talking about the ancients who thought that who had lost the primitive tradition of creation, sort of the primitive man, the people who live in caves, forage and things like that. It says, prior to the prevalence of the Epicurean philosophy, they never pretended that man could come out of that state alone by his own unaided efforts. So there has to be something else acting on people, some force. And you see that, in myths throughout the world.
Intervention of the
there has to be
gods.
some sort of gods. It's Prometheus gives fire to the first humans, and that's what sort of creates society from there.
Yes.
Or Pandora's box with all of that sort of thing, and there's myths everywhere about the divine intervention bringing you out of that very brutish state.
Yeah, and he mentions like the positivists. He talks about that they believed in the effects without any causes. They believed that this just happened. And then he has this at the very bottom of 28. He says this, which is really interesting, and I don't know what to think about it. He says, if savage tribes have ever become civilized, it has been by the influence from abroad, by the aid of men already civilized, through conquest, colonies, or missionaries, never by their own indigenous efforts, nor even by commerce, as it is so confidently asserted in this mercantile age. Nothing in all history indicates the ability of a savage people to pass itself from the savage state to the civilized. That's pretty damning statement about people who he would consider to be savage tribes. But there's some truth to that, but I don't know what truth there is. It's an interesting and I believe pretty controversial statement.
Because it does seem to imply, like you were saying, that they haven't had that intervention, from the divine or from other people. And so if you don't have that, then you're not really a society. You're not really, you can't really progress without that outside influence. So maybe some people are, neglected by God in some way in this theory. And it's just, I don't know how he's going to reconcile that. Because I don't know. Clearly that's not.
But there's
something he believes.
There's some truth to it in the sense that, that the as I like to call them, the nomadic, illiterate tribes, peoples of North America, lived in North America for probably the same amount of time that the Europeans lived in Europe.
Yeah.
But then they built, the Europeans had a written language and books and science and ships and churches and buildings and at that point, running water, septic.
He does clarify, his statement here, though, at the end of that paragraph at the top of page 29. He says, the lowest, most degraded, and most debased savage tribe that has yet been discovered has at least some rude outlines or feeble reminiscences of a social state of government, morals, law, and religion. For even in superstition, the most gross, there is a reminiscence of true religion, but the people in the alleged state of nature have none.
Yes.
So he's still saying that there's something there. And I think that's sort of the human nature part, the God-given part to all of us, that reason, the ability to form some form of concept, but certain people just haven't gotten it, to quite to the extent that other people have. They haven't been able to work themselves past the state that they are in.
I think that is a really fascinating area of study. How one culture progresses and another doesn't.
Yeah.
And what are the factors that cause one? Of course, a lot of it is just the ancient Greeks was, what was it? The main theory saying how the ancient Greeks were able to form democracies in those city-states was the three crops that they were able to grow. Olives for the olive oil, the wheat for bread. What was the third one? There's a third thing that they can grow. And they can alternate, so you can have like 10 acres, and you can support a family on it, and that was the foundation of their society, and the fact that their land would be able to be supporting that, and then you can efficiently cultivate the crops and all that kind of stuff, and have enough time to think about politics and stuff like that. So maybe it's just a matter of you have to get to a certain level of economic success before you can really develop the language, written language, and the sophistication, and be able to progress from one. Because the problem is, if you're illiterate, you can't do an effective job of passing the knowledge on from one generation to the other to build on it. Because it just starts over again. Anyway.
He then goes on to say, and I think this is a good point too, he says, the advocates of the theory deceive themselves by transporting into their imaginary state of nature the views, habits, and capacities of the civilized man.
Right.
They're always, because he says, that at the end, How then can they, since on the theory civil society has no root in nature, but is a purely artificial creature, even conceive of civilization, much less realize it? For all of these abstract sort of blank slate people, how can we think of anything better than what we have?
Right.
There's nothing there. We need society to come up with a better society. So clearly it's just sort of this sort of cyclical nature. You can't start it without already being in it. And he says, I like this quote. He says, every writer, whatever else he writes himself.
Yeah.
And he says, that's what these social compact theorists are doing.
Yeah.
They're just writing themselves and their own society as if it is the base of everything, as though those values already existed and have to already exist in their state of nature. But the state of nature presupposes that they don't. And so it can't happen like that.
Right. Yes. Good points.
He then moves on. Let me see what else I have here on the next couple pages. But he says, conception is always easier than its realization, and between a design and its execution, there's always a weary distance, up on top of page 30. He says, the poetry of all nations is a wail over unrealized ideals, which is a pretty great line. Because, if the foundation of society is these abstract concepts, we could never really get to those abstract concepts. We have to have something else that is sort of creating society, rather than these sort of vague principles, these ideals that are impossible to achieve.
I like how he mentions the republics of Plato, Sir Thomas More, Campanella, etc. He says, they remain utopias, not solely because they're intrinsically absurd, because they're not a realization of the reality of who people are and what society is.
Yeah.
And then he does mention this thing about language, which I thought was kind of an interesting statement. Some philosophers suppose men have invented language, forgetting that it requires language to give the ability to invent language. What do you think of that?
I think there's some logic to it, right? Because how do people think without language? I think we were talking about this before, last episode, or maybe even earlier this episode. But it's like, how can you conceive of language without already being in it? Right. How do you just move from sounds and sort of pointing at things, which that's kind of what people think language you must have originated as. Right. I don't know. There's different theories into how the brain works and how we sort of categorize concepts. But it's like the idea of like prepositions. How do you come up with prepositions without already having language?
Yes.
How do you sort of describe under? You can't really point to under. You could hold two things. This one's under this one.
Yeah, it's a concept.
But it's like the more abstract you get in language, and language is so abstract. How do you create the future tense?
Yes.
How do you describe things that will happen without already having the ability to describe those things?
Yes.
It's just such a weird. How do you get there? And I don't think you can without already having some idea of language present.
Well, it's either aliens or, as Joe Rogan had once said or talked about, I don't know if he believed it, but he was talking about a theory of the magic mushroom.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah, I think it's kind of ridiculous. I think I told you that, the story that I heard someone talk. I forget who was talking about it. It was Michael Knowles. I don't think I said this on the podcast, but he was referencing some like psychology article that was saying, mushrooms might be very useful in curing mental illnesses. There's one doctor who took a bunch of psychedelics, and then he felt incredible and had all of these problems solved. Right. And then he took psychedelics again and he saw demons.
Yes.
And so like the article kind of brushes away that second part. Yes. And it's like, well, look at this. It's great. He has these very clear results that he had. And Michael Knowles made the point, well, maybe we shouldn't be looking for solutions in things that cause people to see demons, no matter how good the effects might be the first time.
Yeah, that's why I'm always curious about the spiritualists. I have this spirit, this thing and that thing, and they're non-denominational belief in the spirit world, but they don't believe in any demons. It's like, well, some of those spirits, this is a percentage. Some of them are going to have to be bad, aren't they? They can't all just be, giving you, privileged information about the future or something. Some of them are going to be bad, I would think. I guess maybe those spirits don't live, but you'd think, why not?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, going back to what he's talking about idealism. I think he also makes.
Where are you at?
Still on page 30. He makes another good point. He's got a lot of good points in this chapter.
All right, go ahead.
Because he makes the point, people are very rarely moved just by reasoning, right? By these abstract principles. It's always they're moved by their affections, passions, instincts, and habits. That's what he's saying. These idealists aren't taking into account, people's lives, ordinary people. Because I think they are a lot of times these armchair philosophers who like to think big thoughts and don't really pay attention to how people actually live and work and feel about things.
Well, a lot of it's arrogance because they don't really think that that's of value.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I wasn't really as persuaded about those kind of arguments, just because I think I think those philosophers tend to gloss over.
Sure.
And their response would be, well, yeah, that's what people are doing just out of habit. It doesn't mean that that there isn't some sort of higher purpose behind an agreement to be part of a country or a society or the contract theory, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But speaking of the contract thing, he does go into kind of segues into it, I think, at that point where he's talking about, well, what about the people that don't actually agree? The dissenters, the people that refuse, or the people that are too young. I'm on 32. Then he talks about, like, at the time he wrote this, the women couldn't vote.
Yeah.
Which we're not going to talk about that. But there's a certain level of society where you wouldn't have a say in the social contract theory. So what is the theory? And it's kind of funny. I don't know if I've read so many references to eminent domain, but which is the government taking your property. And so he mentions eminent domain and the government that is created by the people, by the social contract, then being able to take your stuff. That kind of doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. If it is all just, hey, we're in the social contract. I mean, I get it when you enter into agreement, you're making certain agreements with whoever you're contracting with, and they're bound to that. But are you really agreeing to, well, if you really want to, you can take all my stuff, but you got to pay me for it. I don't know that I don't think that contract actually exists in practicality.
Yeah. He also brings up immigrants, which I thought was an interesting argument too. He says, if you're forced to emigrate from your home country, under duress or war or whatever, you're not really freely joining into the compact of the country that you're moving to.
Yeah.
You're there by force. You didn't really give your consent to be there.
Yes.
And I think that's very true. I think you see that a lot with immigrants to other countries. They don't really have any desire to fit in with the country. They're there because they're going from something worse, and they don't feel any affinity to the country or accept its values.
That's why you have to stop on the border and at least have them say please. Because if they say please, can I come into your country? Okay, but if they just barge in, they're not part of the contract.
Yeah, exactly. You seem like you have something more to say there.
I have a lot to say.
I know you do.
We don't need to go down that
That's
path.
All right.
I have 10 rants on that. But I think that's pretty much, that's the essence of my philosophy against illegal immigration right there. At least say, come in, give me your name and say, please, can I come in? Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to do that, get out.
Yeah. He then moves on to...
Because the answer is no.
Yeah.
And the answer has to be no. It has to be no. Because... All right, I'll stop. You're looking at me like, here comes the rant. All right.
He talks about the rights of minorities.
Yes.
Because, in the social compact theory, how do you have minority groups that still have rights within a country?
Yes.
And if it's all just by the consent of the governed, then surely you would just go by the consent of the most people.
Right.
That is what would make sense.
And what if you have a region that's a majority, but a majority in the region, but a minority in the country, like a state?
Should they secede? Should they form their own society?
And that's why there was a large secessionist philosophy in the original 13 colonies. I mean, they weren't saying they were going to drop out any immediate time, but I think they really did believe this was maybe temporary.
Yeah.
Until we'll be part of this until we decide not to. I mean, I think that was implied.
And he also ends, this paragraph on page 33. He says, "What gives to the majority the right to govern the minority who dissent from its action?" Yeah. So, because it's even the principle of majority rule doesn't even work, right? Because if everything is based on consent, and if even 25%, then those 75% can't act on those 25%. They need their consent to do anything, if that's how society works and how the government functions.
Yeah, that's what always bothers me about this. The Democrats do it all the time, Democratic Party, where they say, well, the majority is right, but what you're talking about is a huge a huge number of people that have said no.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome power to have a majority, like say imposing taxes. And you hear this like a local issue is for a school district to pass a tax, they have to have a 4/7 majority. And the school officials hate it. And they said, well, it should just be a majority. It should just be 50% plus one. Well, I like the 4/7. If you can't get at least 57 point something % of the people to agree to this tax, so why should the other 43%, or like say you get 50% plus one, why do the other 50% have to pay you money?
Yeah,
they're making almost half the population pay under threat of arrest or seizure of their property.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the argument he's making.
It's a little bit more respect for these people, but the majority decided. And of course, modern people don't understand what the tyranny of the majority is. It's such a frightening concept because any one of us can get, like with me, the illegal immigration, you can get my dander up and maybe I'd vote for something stupid, really punishing. And then 6 months later, we went a little too far.
Like the Athenians,
exactly,
ordering people to kill the entire population of an island.
Send a trireme out there, give them an order, kill them all. And they're like, gosh, they wake up the next day. Let's send another boat and stop the first one and get the best oars, the fastest guys. We were really going to screw that one up. And I think in that circumstance, they could catch them, but my God.
He then makes a great point on page 34. He exactly predicts the sovereign citizen crazy people. Because, if government is just, if everyone's completely equal in that sort of circumstance and everyone can secede whenever he wants, then why not individuals too? If it's all just a compact, and say, well, you're going to send me to prison.
Yes.
I am not a citizen of this country anymore. I do not belong under your jurisdiction. I am under my own authority because we're all equals here. We all just consented. We're all sovereigns. Therefore, I can withdraw my consent at any time.
Yes.
I am operating under a completely different set of legal obligations. Yes. And so, of course, he says, that's ridiculous. It's not how a nation works. But now you're seeing that idea become even more prominent today. I've seen clips of those
the sovereigns. I've dealt with sovereign citizens in court. Oh, yeah. It's once every couple of years. I mean, that was a new thing to me as a young prosecutor because you usually see them as a prosecutor because they don't want to follow the traffic laws. They don't want to get the plates on there. I have a lot of respect for the idea. It's a fascinating concept. I'm a sovereign citizen, and I'm not bound by your laws. However, they want the benefit of a lot of the laws, and I don't know why they're driving on the road.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not the shortest distance between point A and point B most of the time. Why aren't you going cross country? Right, you got a Jeep. Yeah. Why aren't you cutting through that field? Well, probably because they get shot.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a weird. They're always picking and choosing, which just bothers the hell out of me.
Yeah. But then he says,
because a lot of them are getting state aid and federal aid. A lot of them are on disability. It's like, back it up. Shouldn't you be out in a field somewhere digging your own well? Why are you drinking out of that faucet?
Yeah.
That is from the government. If you're sovereign.
But he answers that question,
Yes.
I think,
Go
almost
ahead.
exactly at the end of that paragraph. It says, would the government employ military force to coerce them back to their allegiance? By what right? Government is their agent, their creature, and no man owes allegiance to his own agent or creature.
Yeah.
So, to view it as their domain. I'm a sovereign citizen. I can collect all the benefits from this country because I control the government. Because I'm a sovereign. We're all in this union of sovereigns. But as soon as the government's like, hey, no, you can't do those things. So, whoa. I withdraw my consent. You had my consent earlier to get all the benefits, but as soon as you try to punish me, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah, they separate themselves because if you're the sovereign and you created the government, you have duties to the rest of society, and they see the government as separate from their neighbors. And if we're all sovereign citizens, then it's just a whole bunch of your other neighbors saying this is how we've decided to allocate this stuff. But anyway.
Yeah. He then, goes on and says, social compact is necessarily limited to the individuals who form it, and as necessarily, unless renewed, expires with them. It thus creates no state, no political corporation, which survives in all its rights and powers, though individuals die. I think that's a great point. It is exactly that. It is just a compact between those people present. There's no way for that authority to pass on under that understanding. How could it? If authority is just within those individuals, how can they possibly create something above them that then goes on to the next generation? I think he makes an excellent point there.
Right.
That it can't create anything other than what those people are themselves.
Yeah, and then he talks about that essentially your society is like an organism,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates something more than just the individuals that make it as its requisite parts, I guess you'd say. And he says that, there is no society without individuals, and there's no individual without society. But in society, there is that which is not individual and is more than all individuals. And I think that's true. Yeah. I mean, that's really how we conceive of government and society, is that we've created something separate almost, like it's from us and of us, but it's now kind of like a layered on top of everything. We've created something by getting together and willing this into existence. Yeah. That's the foundation of all government, I think. And I think he's right about that.
Yeah. And he says, real government has its ground in this real living solidarity and represents the social element, which is not individual, but above all individuals, as man is above men.
Right.
So it's based in that fundamental nature of humans. It has to be something that is above all humans and isn't just, what each individual decides. It has to have something above all of the individuals. I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and he talks about like a nationhood on the next. I'm on 36. I don't know if I'm going too fast, but he talks about a nationhood. Yeah, and he said he mentions eminent domain here. I think maybe the second time, but he says, whence then does government derive its territorial jurisdiction, the right of eminent domain claimed by all national governments? Once it's titled vacant and unoccupied lands. I mean, how do we decide, if there's vacant land and from a real estate law perspective, what gives me the title to the land? Well, it's actually titled in the land records to put everybody on notice, and that's vis-a-vis each other. But really, there's some governmental basis for the ownership of land, which has to be either statutory or constitutional. There has to be some sort of backing of that claim to the property, something more than just I'm here, and I physically have it, because otherwise somebody can just bump you off in the next thing. Yeah. So it's in the eminent domain thing is well, there's some layer underneath your ownership. You don't own it down to the center of the earth. There's some thing propping up your ownership, which is the government or society.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's a great practical point. 'Cause, the Louisiana Purchase, things like that. How could we just buy, tracts of land? I guarantee every single person living in that territory wasn't asked if they consent to be under the government of the United States. No, we have an understanding that governments have control over this land and can, exchange that land between each other without asking purely the people who just have settled there.
Yes.
It's not just those individuals. There's something about the ownership of land that makes the government what it is.
Well, and there were as an aside, there were some land records. I'm trying to think of if St. Genevieve is one of them, but St. Genevieve was the oldest settlement west of the Mississippi. Of course, French settlement, but there was a period of time, I don't know if it was St. Genevieve, but south of that area was Spanish territory. So there's Spanish land grants. There were French land records, and then the United States took it over. And so who had ownership of the land? Was it from the French records, and they basically incorporated them into the American records? So you had, but it was based upon the sovereign authority over all of the land, and then that delegated authority for those people to have land grants or buy the property from the state. Yeah, exactly. It's when you get down to the practical of it, it's like, he's right. They're as far as the ownership of the property and the sovereign basis of it.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think what else he has in this last paragraph. I think a lot of it is just, questions, leading up to the next chapter. He says, whence did Rome become a landholder and the governing people a territorial people? Whence does any nation become a territorial nation, lord of the domain? Certainly never by the cession of individuals, and hence no civilized government ever did or could originate in the so-called social compact.
Yeah.
I think this is 100%. A fantastic refutation. Yep. It's definitely the very easy to read as well, very clear to follow.
Oh, it's easy to read. But, it's pretty
very
dense.
clear. Dense, but it's clear. I think his reasoning is sound. Sure. I think it tracks. I think I'm 100% off the ship of the social compact.
I'm not 100% off.
I think I am,
but it's hard for me to give up the ship or whatever.
Yeah.
But he's certainly persuading me, which I was not that I.
And you're hard to persuade.
Not that I often think about social contract theory, but it was always kind of a premise of mine.
I think it's like he says, it's the premise of the American people. That's what they all think. That's what they all believe.
Right.
That's what they're all taught.
Yes.
It's just a prevailing theory, and that's what everybody thinks.
Yep.
But yeah, no, looking forward to the next chapter, which will be recorded over Zoom when I am in Florida.
Yes.
Next week. So yeah, any other final thoughts for this episode?
No.
All right, this has been season 9,
Yes.
episode 4 of Unlimited Opinions. That's a great way to end this episode here. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions.
Did I say I'm still Mark Bishop?
I don't know if you did. I think you were coughing while you were doing it. I think it was implied. Everybody gets it by now.
Good night.